Hey there, welcome back. In this tutorial, we're going to learn about different kinds of effects and where to put them in your work. What are effects? Effects are how you process the audio signal. You apply effects to inserts and sends in your signal chain. With analog recording, you get effects by connecting your console via a cable to a piece of hardware that processed the audio. You can still connect your computer to effects hardware, but today many effects are software-based. Of course, you can still use a hardware-based insert like a compressor and a preamp for a microphone. I always use a mic preamp and a compressor expander. Most music software includes some plugins for effects. These are software effects that you control from your computer screen, not from an external piece of hardware. Each effect is a small program that runs in your computer's CPU. Some plugins are already installed with your music software. Others can be downloaded or installed from the disks that came with your music software. Then they become part of the music software, which is called the host for the plugins. The host software calls up the plugins. The plugins don't work without the host. When the first digital audio workstations were released about 30 years ago, the manufacturers also released the code for the program architecture so that other developers could write compatible, symbiotic third-party programs. This is where plugins come from. You can generally use plugins made by your music software's manufacturer as well as plugins made by other companies. Cubase uses VST format plugins, and Pro Tools uses what's called RTAS format plugins. Many plugins these days come in bundles that offer a bunch of different effects. Software plugins are really important in the audio industry. In fact, they've replaced racks full of audio processing gear. Like buses, because plugins are virtual and digital, they've got some powerful advantage over these racks of audio processing hardware. For example, you can use the same plugin over and over in one song on different tracks if you want. If you really like the way you've set up a plugin, you can save these settings as what's called a custom preset, and then use that preset again later in a different song. This way, it's totally easy to remember what you did on a certain song, and it's easy to get a certain sound. There's no noise or signal degradation either, a huge plus. Plugins require major processing power. The more plugins you use in one song, the higher the load on your CPU. Each time you launch a plugin, even the same plugin, but inserted on a different track, you need more computer resources. When you select a plugin for an insert slot, you launch an outside program or create an instance of the software process at that point in your signal flow. You can instantiate the same plugin many times. This creates multiple instances of that software process, so that's why it requires more processing power when you use plugins on the inserts. Too many plugins will slow down your computer a lot and maybe even crash it. They can also make your playback get choppy, interrupted. The bottom line is make sure you've got horsepower to spare on your processor because plugins are well worth it. Both Pro Tools and Cubase give you gauges to show you how your system is holding up, so if your CPU is in the red or maxed out, you might be in trouble, but the software will let you know about it. Broadly speaking, there's two kinds of effects or signal processing that are commonly used in audio. The first kind of effect is dynamic-based. Effects like equalization, compression, expanders, gates, and limiters. These are effects that change the volume or adjust the frequencies of your audio signal. That's why they're grouped under the term dynamic. They're dynamic-based effects. Normally, you use these on inserts rather than sends because you typically don't blend a processed and unprocessed signal together. You need 100% of the audio processed as it plays. The second group of effects is time-based. So what they do is affect the duration of the signal in some way. The most common ones are reverb, delay, chorus. Generally, you don't hear a signal with 100% processing via a time-based effect in your mix. Usually it's blended with a dry or unprocessed signal. There's also some special effects that don't fit neatly in either the dynamics or time-based categories. For example, both Pro Tools and Cubase provide a dithering plugin. This type of plugin helps maintain the sound quality when you export from higher to lower bit depths, like 24-bit depth to a 16-bit depth file for CD. You heard me mention EQ. This stands for equalization. Equalization, or EQ, works by boosting or reducing the amplitude of specific ranges of frequencies or bands within your audio. The treble and bass knobs on your home stereo are essentially EQ controls. The controls in an EQ plugin allow for much more sensitive fine-tuning than you can do on your car stereo, however. The EQ controls really help with the mixed blend of your various instruments. For example, if you find that two high-frequency instruments, like a violin and a flute, don't sound in balance, you can boost or reduce the frequency that's unwanted. If your vocalist has too much s in the sound, you can take off some of the highs using your EQ. Now let's talk about compressors. A compressor takes the loudest part of audio and reduces the volume. Compressors are commonly used to add some punch to individual tracks, especially bass and drums. A limiter is used when you've got sudden spikes that send your otherwise perfect recording into the red on the output. It might not have clipped during recording, but when you mix it with all the other tracks, the master output is in the danger zone. If you apply a little limiting to that offending track, it can fix the problem. A de-esser helps remove unwanted sibilance or hissing from your track, but sometimes it can take out too much. It's better to set up your mic appropriately if you've got a very hissy vocalist. An expander is like the mirror image of a compressor. It reduces the volume of sound below a certain level. Noise gates are a type of expander. They can help filter low-level noise from your work. Reverb is the most common time-based effect, and it's used to give a track the spaciousness of a real performing environment. You can usually choose from some presets like big church or small room. Delay causes a signal to be heard later than the original audio. If used well, it can create a cool echo effect that can thicken a vocal very nicely. Some special effects plugins are pretty common in audio recordings. Chorus mixes a slightly delayed and detuned copy of the original signal to make it sound as if there's more than one instrument or voice playing in unison. A reverse plugin flips your signal from back to front, giving you something like reverse cymbals. Flanging combines a cymbal with a slightly delayed copy of itself. It doesn't create a traditional echo or delay, but the original signal and the copy create a feedback loop that has an edgy, sweeping sort of sound. Modulation will allow for pitch shifting, and you can use this to adjust some questionable tuning or for some cool effect. We'll be exploring some of these effects and how to manipulate their controls in more detail later on in this course. This concludes our introduction to effects. Next, we're going to take a look at EQ.